The Vampire King's son was always sick, until the nanny looked under his bed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. As the storm clouds gathered over the mountains, a young woman named Clara Thompson made her way through the dark, winding streets of the kingdom. She was on a mission, delivering freshly baked bread to the mysterious Silver Isle Castle, where whispers of a vampire king and his sickly son filled the air. Clara had no time for such rumors, though. She had her own struggles, 2 jobs, a grandmother to care for, and a life that never seemed to slow down. The rain was relentless, soaking her simple coat and shoes, but she pushed forward. The delivery was important, even if it seemed trivial to the nobility. The bread would feed the castle staff, and the small payment she received in return would feed her and her grandmother for a few days. As she approached the castle gates, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, making the ancient stone walls of the castle look even more intimidating. Clara couldn't help but feel a shiver down her spine, but she brushed it off as just the cold. When the castle guard saw her, he gruffly pulled her inside, away from the storm. He led her through dark hallways to the kitchen, where a warm fire crackled. It was only then that she was asked to wait. The servants were busy, and the bread would be delivered shortly, but Clara was left alone in the dimly lit corridor, the distant sound of murmuring voices echoing through the halls. After what seemed like hours, Clara finally made her way down a side passage to leave the bread by the kitchen door, but she froze when she heard something strange, a faint, irregular heartbeat coming from behind a heavy wooden door. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she pushed the door open, just enough to peer inside. There, in the center of the room, was the prince, the Vampire King's son, who had been locked away for 50 years due to a strange, incurable illness. His skin was pale, almost blue, and his chest barely rose and fell with each shallow breath. Clara felt a pang of sympathy for the boy, and before she could stop herself, she moved closer. She gently placed her fingers on his wrist, checking for a pulse, as her grandmother had taught her. But what happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Under her touch, the boy's pulse strengthened, just slightly, but unmistakably. Clara jerked her hand back in shock. His eyelids fluttered, and for a brief moment, the prince seemed to be coming back to life. But before she could process what was happening, the door slammed open, and a tall, imposing figure stood in the doorway. The Vampire King himself, his eyes cold and furious, locked eyes with Clara. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Clara, startled, stumbled over her words. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just checking the boy. The king's gaze shifted from her to his son, and for a moment, Clara thought she saw something in his eyes, something akin to hope. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "You touched him," the king said, his voice softer now but filled with an unsettling calm. Clara nodded, her heart racing. "I didn't mean to cause any harm. You have done something," the king interrupted, his voice now tinged with an emotion Clara couldn't quite place. "Prepare a guest chamber. This woman stays." Clara didn't understand what was happening. She had come to deliver bread, nothing more. But now, she was being pulled into a world of ancient magic, secrets, and a boy who had been asleep for 50 years. As the king ordered his guards to escort her to her room, Clara couldn't help but wonder, what had she just awakened? Clara spent the night in the guest chamber, her mind racing with the events that had unfolded. She had come to the castle to deliver bread, but now she was trapped in a world of secrets and strange powers. The room was luxurious, larger than any place she had ever slept in, with velvet curtains, a massive bed, and antique furniture that whispered of centuries gone by. But despite the opulence, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the boy, the prince. His lifeless body had stirred under her touch, and she had felt something stir inside her too, a sense of responsibility, of connection to a mystery she had no intention of uncovering. But she was already part of it, whether she liked it or not. Morning came, and with it, the soft knock on her door. A maid entered, her expression neutral. "The king requests your presence," she said before turning to leave. Clara stood, feeling like an intruder in a world far beyond her own. She followed the maid through the castle's winding corridors, her footsteps echoing in the silence. They reached the infirmary, where King Alaric stood beside his son's bed, watching over him like a lion guarding its cub. His face was tense, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes, hope that Clara had awakened something in his son. The prince was still unconscious, but the color had returned to his cheeks, and his breathing was steadier. For the first time in years, he looked like he might survive. The room was filled with the scent of herbs and medicinal oils, and Clara noticed a few unfamiliar faces among the servants. They were all watching her closely, their eyes filled with suspicion. One of them, an elderly man in a white robe, stepped forward. "What did you do to him?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Clara glanced at the prince, then back at the man. "I didn't do anything special," she said, her voice shaky. "I just touched his wrist. That's all." The man frowned. "That's impossible," he muttered. "No one has been able to even wake him from his sleep for 50 years. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. What had she done? "It wasn't me," she said quickly. "I swear. I don't know why it worked. I didn't even mean to." The king raised his hand, silencing the conversation. His gaze shifted from Clara to his son. "It doesn't matter," he said softly. "What matters is that he's alive, and it's because of you." Clara was still trying to process everything when the king turned to one of the guards. "Prepare the royal physicians," he commanded. "We need to understand what happened here." The guards nodded and left the room, leaving Clara standing in the center of the chamber, feeling out of place. King Alaric's attention returned to Clara. "You've done something extraordinary," he said, his voice low and measured. "And I need to know why." Clara swallowed, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a delivery girl. I have no magic or special abilities. I don't know why my touch did anything." The king studied her for a long moment, his storm gray eyes intense. "It's not just that," he said. "You're more than you appear to be, and I will find out what you truly are." Clara felt her heart race. What did he mean by that? Was he threatening her? "I promise you, Clara Thompson," the king continued, "that I will get to the bottom of this. You will stay here, under my protection, until I understand why you were able to heal my son, and until I understand why you've come into our lives." Clara wanted to protest, to say she didn't belong here, that she had done nothing special. But when she looked into the king's eyes, she knew there was no escaping this world she had inadvertently stepped into. She nodded silently, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. As the king turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You may think you are just a simple girl," he said, his voice softening slightly, "but I believe you are the key to saving my kingdom." Clara was left standing in the infirmary, her thoughts swirling. What had she gotten herself into? Was she truly part of something much bigger than herself, something that had to do with the prince's curse? And why had she felt such an inexplicable connection to him, as if their fates were somehow intertwined? As the king's words echoed in her mind, Clara couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if she stayed? Would she be able to unlock the mysteries of the prince's curse? Or would she get swept up in a world where she had no place? Clara awoke early the next morning, her thoughts still clouded from the events of the previous night. The sunlight barely made it through the thick castle walls, casting long shadows across the room. As she sat up, she noticed the soft knock at her door, followed by the maid from yesterday. "The king requests your presence," she said, her voice even more neutral than before. Clara hesitated, still unsure of her place in this strange world, but nodded in silent agreement. As she followed the maid through the halls once again, she couldn't shake the feeling that every step was drawing her further into something she didn't fully understand. The castle's interior seemed even more imposing by daylight, its towering walls and cold marble floors now feeling more like a prison than a sanctuary. She was led to a large chamber where King Alaric stood by the window, gazing out at the expansive view of the kingdom. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was commanding. The prince, his son, lay motionless in the bed beside him, still in the same state Clara had left him in. His pale skin seemed to glow under the soft light, but there was no sign of the life that Clara had briefly stirred in him. "Sit." Alaric's voice was low but firm as he gestured to a chair beside him. Clara sat hesitantly, wondering what he wanted from her now. "You've done something extraordinary," he began, his voice unusually soft for someone so powerful. "My son, Kale, has been locked in this cursed sleep for 50 years. No one has been able to wake him, not even the greatest healers or sorcerers in my court. But last night, you did what no one else could. You gave me hope." Clara could feel the weight of his words, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of something, a connection between her and this ancient ruler, as if fate had forced them together. But she quickly shook off the thought. "I didn't do anything special," she replied, her voice shaky. "I just touched him. It wasn't intentional." The king turned to look at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if studying her every word. "I believe it was more than that," he said, his tone still calm but full of intensity. "No one has ever touched him and caused a reaction like that. I need to understand why you were able to do what others could not. And I need to know what you are." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm just a delivery girl," she said quickly. "I have no magic or special abilities. I don't know why it worked. I'm not someone important." The king's gaze softened just slightly, but his next words were sharp. "You are more than you know," he said. "There is something in you, something ancient and powerful, and I will find out what it is." Clara's heart raced. She had no idea what the king meant, but she couldn't help feeling like she was caught in a game that she had no control over. Before she could speak, a soft voice interrupted the moment. A servant entered the room, holding a tray of food, and placed it on the table between Clara and Alaric. The king glanced at the servant and nodded, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "You will remain here for the time being," Alaric continued. "I need answers, and I believe you can help me find them. But know this, Clara Thompson, you are now a part of this world, whether you like it or not." Clara was about to protest when she saw the look in his eyes, fierce and unwavering. It was a look that made her realize she had no choice but to comply. She was in deeper than she had ever imagined. As Clara sat there, unable to speak, the king turned his attention back to the prince. "Kale needs to wake up," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "And you may be the one who can make that happen." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew she was tangled in a web that was much bigger than her. The king had placed his trust in her, but trust could be a dangerous thing in a world filled with darkness and power. She would have to navigate carefully or risk being consumed by the very forces she was trying to understand. As the king turned to leave, he looked at Clara once more. "Stay here," he said, his voice no longer soft but commanding. "And do not leave the castle grounds. We have much to discuss, and I will be watching you." Clara nodded, though her mind was racing. She had come to deliver bread, but now she was caught in a web of ancient curses, powerful vampire kings, and a prince whose fate was tied to her in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As the door closed behind the king, Clara sat back in her chair, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. She had no idea what to do next. But one thing was certain, she could not leave now. The story of her life had just taken an unexpected turn, and she was about to find herself at the center of something that could change everything. Clara spent the following days locked in the castle, her mind spinning with the constant questions that King Alaric had left her with. Despite his orders to stay, she had no intention of remaining idle. Every moment spent in the vast, empty halls made her feel more like a prisoner than a guest. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't even known magic existed, let alone that she could be a part of it. Her life was supposed to be simple: work, pay the bills, take care of her grandmother. But now, her world had been turned upside down, and with each passing moment, she felt herself sinking deeper into a world of supernatural power, danger, and secrets. The king had been unrelenting. Day after day, he would visit her room with questions, observing her every move, trying to unlock the mystery of her touch, the touch that had awakened his son, the prince who had been in a deep, unbreakable sleep for 50 years. But Clara had no answers to give. She didn't know how she had done it. She didn't know why it had worked. All she knew was that she was now part of something far bigger than herself. Despite the tension, Clara couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the prince, Kale. She watched from afar, her gaze lingering on his pale, still form in the royal infirmary. Every time she saw him, she couldn't help but wonder if it was possible to do more than just wake him up. Could she save him? The thought haunted her, She couldn't just stand by and watch. Even though she didn't understand the nature of his illness or the curse that held him captive, Clara knew that the prince needed her. On the 4th day of her stay, Clara was summoned to the infirmary once again. She felt a strange mix of anticipation and fear as she made her way down the cold stone corridors. What was the king expecting of her now? Was he hoping she could repeat the miracle from that first night? As she entered the room, the king was already there, standing at the side of his son's bed. His expression was intense, his eyes fixed on Cale's face. "Clara," the king said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You've seen the prince's condition. You've touched him, and something changed. But we need more. He needs more." Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding. She felt like she was walking into a trap, but she had no choice but to play along. "What can I do?" she asked softly. The king turned to look at her, his storm gray eyes filled with something she couldn't quite decipher. "I don't know," he said, "but you must try. There is something ancient, something powerful inside of you. I know it. You're the only one who can save him." Clara swallowed, uncertainty flooding her chest. She wasn't a healer. She wasn't magical. But the king's gaze was unwavering, and she felt an undeniable pull to his son. Something inside her stirred, as if there was a force beyond her control urging her to help. But the weight of the king's words lingered. "I don't know how," Clara repeated. "I can't explain it. It was just a touch." "That touch," Alaric said, stepping closer, his voice firm but desperate. "It gave me hope. It brought life back to my son. We need to understand what you did, and we need to do it again. There's a curse, Clara, one that has bound him for half a century. I can't break it alone. But with you, we may stand a chance." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The prince's curse was a living thing, a shadow that had clung to him for years, and the king needed her to help lift it. The reality of the situation was overwhelming. She felt small and powerless in the face of the vampire king's grand expectations, but there was no denying the connection between her and the prince. There was something in the air, something unspoken, but undeniable. "What do I need to do?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Touch him again," the king instructed. "But this time, do not hold back. Let your touch connect with his, and let it reach deep into the heart of the curse. We must find the source of this affliction." Clara nodded, although her hands were shaking. She didn't know what would happen. She didn't know if she could help. But she had to. Try. She approached the bed, her heart pounding in her chest. The prince's face was as pale as ever, his lips a faint shade of blue. He looked so fragile, so lifeless. But Clara knew she had to do something. With a deep breath, she gently placed her hand on his wrist once again. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she felt it. A pulse, faint at first, but growing stronger under her fingertips. A warmth began to spread through her hand, and with it, a sense of connection. The prince's body responded, just as it had the first time. His chest rose and fell with a deeper breath, and for the first time in 50 years, his eyes fluttered open. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Cale's eyes were the color of twilight, deep and unreadable, but as he gazed at her, there was a spark of recognition. "You came back," he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She had no idea what was happening, but in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. The prince was awake, and the curse that had held him for so long was beginning to unravel. But at what cost? Clara stood frozen, her hand still resting on Cale's wrist, as his eyes slowly flickered open. The prince, the boy who had been locked in a deep slumber for 50 years, was now staring up at her with confusion and something else, something more personal, a connection that sent an unexpected shiver down Clara's spine. His lips parted slightly, and his voice, hoarse and weak, barely escaped his throat. "Who are you?" His question was soft, as though he had not fully adjusted to the world around him. Clara's heart raced. She had never expected this, had never imagined that her simple act of kindness, of touching him, would result in him waking up. I'm Clara," she said quietly, unsure of what to say next. "I'm the one who—" She hesitated, her mind racing. "I woke you up." Cale blinked, his eyes growing clearer, the confusion slowly fading. "I remember you," he murmured, almost to himself, before his gaze turned to his father, who stood at the foot of the bed, watching with intense focus. King Alaric's presence was commanding, And even now, as he observed his son, Clara could feel the weight of his expectations. "Father," Cale's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an unspoken question. The king stepped forward, his face softening for the first time since Clara had met him. "You're awake, my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "After 50 years, you've finally come back to us." The room was filled with an odd silence, broken only by the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the castle halls. Clara could feel the tension between the father and son, a bond that seemed ancient and unbreakable. Yet, there was something else there, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a recognition that this moment was more than just the prince's awakening. The king turned to Clara, his eyes narrowing slightly, but his expression remained unreadable. "You've done something no one else could," he said, his voice low. "I don't know how, but I can't ignore it. You've awakened him." Clara swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The weight of the king's words felt like a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. She had done nothing more than touch the prince, and yet, the king seemed to believe she was the key to breaking the curse that had kept his son trapped for half a century. "I don't understand," Clara finally said, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything special. I touched him. That's all." The king's gaze softened just a fraction, and for the briefest moment, Clara thought she saw something like gratitude in his eyes. "It was enough," he said, his voice quiet but filled with a force she couldn't quite explain. "And now, we need to understand why." The room seemed to hold its breath, as though the very air was waiting for something to happen. Cale shifted slightly in the bed, his breathing still labored but steadier now. Clara could feel the pulse beneath her fingertips, the life that had returned to him. But she didn't know what to do with it. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. King Alaric looked at his son, and for a moment, his eyes softened. "Now," he said, "we find out what this means." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Clara wasn't sure what she had gotten herself into, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. Over the next few days, Clara stayed close to the prince, following the king's orders and monitoring Cale's progress. The prince's health improved, albeit slowly. He was still weak, his body having been dormant for so long. But with each passing day, the color returned to his cheeks, and his movements became less sluggish. The more time Clara spent with him, the more she felt a strange connection, as if their fates had intertwined in some way she couldn't fully comprehend. But the king wasn't content with just waking Cale up. He had one goal in mind. He needed to know why it had happened, why Clara's touch had made the prince stir. Every day, he would visit her, asking her questions, probing for answers that Clara didn't have. The king's obsession with the mystery was both unsettling and fascinating. One night, as Clara sat alone in her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a darkness in the castle that had nothing to do with the curse that had held Cale captive. It was something deeper, something she could feel but couldn't place. Suddenly, the door to her room opened, and the king stepped in. His expression was grim, his eyes dark with worry. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to show you." Without waiting for her response, he turned and began walking toward the door. Clara hesitated for a moment but followed him, a sense of dread rising in her chest. What could the king want now? As they made their way down the dark corridors, Clara noticed the castle was eerily quiet. The usual hum of servants and guards was absent. Something felt wrong. "What is it?" Clara asked, her voice tight. The king glanced at her, his face impassive. "We've been investigating the curse," he said, "and we've uncovered something disturbing." They arrived at a hidden door, one Clara had never seen before. The king pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and old books. The walls were lined with shelves full of ancient tomes and scrolls. "This is where the curse was first written," the king said, his voice cold. "It's also where I made a mistake." Clara stepped forward, her heart racing. The king's words were cryptic, but the look on his face told her everything. She needed to know. There was more to this curse than just the prince's sleep. And now, it seemed, the truth was about to unravel. As the king reached for a dusty scroll on one of the shelves, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was no longer just about Cale. This was about something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. Clara stood in the small, dimly lit room, her heart racing as King Alaric unrolled the ancient scroll in front of her. The words on the parchment were written in a language she didn't understand, their symbols strange and foreign. Yet, the king's hands trembled slightly as he read them aloud, his voice filled with a mix of anger and regret. "This is the curse," he said, pointing to the text. "The one that's held my son captive for 50 years. The one I made a deal with a powerful sorcerer to save him from. But it came at a cost. The curse was meant to keep Kale in his sleep, to protect him, but it also bound him to something far darker, something more dangerous." Clara looked at him, her mind reeling. "What do you mean? What's the danger?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The king's gaze darkened, his eyes filled with years of pain. "The curse is not just a spell of sleep," he said slowly. "It is also a binding, a link between Kale and a force far beyond this world. A force that has been growing stronger every year, feeding off his power, waiting for the right moment to take him fully. And that moment is almost here." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words was overwhelming, and she felt a cold chill creep down her spine. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do we stop it?" King Alaric's expression softened slightly, though there was no trace of hope in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've tried everything. Healers, magic, even dark rituals, but nothing has worked. The curse cannot be broken by ordinary means. The only way to stop it is to destroy the force that's feeding off of him. And that force, Clara, is not just a curse. It is a living entity." Clara's mind was spinning. A living entity? She had never heard of anything like this before. "A living entity," she repeated, trying to make sense of it. "But how do we fight something like that?" The king's gaze became even more intense. "We don't," he said quietly. "You do." Clara stared at him, her confusion mounting. "Me?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "But you are the key." The king interrupted, his voice firm. "The curse recognized something in you. Something powerful. I don't know what it is, but it's there. And if anyone can stop this entity from taking Kale, it's you." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't magical. She was just a simple girl who had found herself caught in something far beyond her understanding. "I don't know how to stop it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know what this entity is." The king looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if he was trying to read something deeper. "Neither do I," he said quietly. "But I believe you have the power to find out. You've already awakened my son. You're the only one who can help him now." Clara felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. How could she help? She didn't have any special powers. She was just a delivery girl who had stumbled into this mess. But something inside her stirred, a quiet, unfamiliar voice telling her that maybe, just maybe, she was capable of more than she thought. She had to try. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice shaking but determined. King Alaric looked at her with a new resolve in his eyes. "I want you to go to the heart of the curse," he said. "There is a place deep within the castle, a hidden chamber that no one has entered for centuries. It is where the curse was first placed upon Kale. You must go there and find the source of the curse. Only then will you be able to destroy the entity that is feeding off him." Clara swallowed hard, but she nodded. She had no choice. She couldn't let the prince suffer any longer. She had to do this, even if she didn't understand how. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Where do I go?" The king turned and walked toward a stone door at the far end of the room. He pushed it open with ease, revealing a narrow, winding staircase that descended deep into the castle's bowels. "This is the way," he said, gesturing for Clara to follow. As they descended into the darkness, Clara's mind raced. What was this place? What would she find at the bottom of these stairs? And, most importantly, what would she have to face to save the prince? The air grew colder with each step they took, and the walls seemed to close in around her. By the time they reached the bottom, Clara could barely see anything, the only light coming from the flickering torch that the king held. The room before them was vast and silent, the air thick with ancient magic. At the center of the room was a stone altar, surrounded by strange symbols etched into the floor. "This is it," the king said, his voice reverberating in the chamber. "The curse was placed here, and it must be broken here. But be careful, Clara. The entity is not a simple spell. It will try to stop you. Do not let it. Clara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. As she stepped forward, she felt a chill run through her body, a presence, a dark energy that seemed to pulse from the stone itself. The entity was here, and it was waiting for her. She took a deep breath and moved closer to the altar. Whatever it took, she would find a way to break the curse. She had to. For Kale. For the kingdom. For herself. Clara took a deep breath as she stood before the stone altar, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The air in the chamber was thick with magic, a palpable force that made her skin tingle. King Alaric stood a few steps behind her, his gaze intense, never leaving her. The entity was close, its presence almost suffocating, but Clara steeled herself. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. She moved slowly, cautiously, toward the center of the altar, her heart pounding with each step. As she did, the symbols on the ground seemed to pulse, glowing faintly, as though they were alive, reacting to her every move. It was as if the very stone beneath her feet was alive, warning her to leave. But she wasn't about to give up. She had a task to complete, and it was one that could change the fate of the prince, and perhaps the entire kingdom. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, and Clara felt a cold, creeping sensation up her spine. She could sense the entity now, its power radiating through the air like a dark cloud surrounding her. It was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She could feel its eyes on her, but she refused to let it control her fear. With a trembling hand, she reached for the symbols etched into the stone. Her fingers brushed against them, and immediately, a surge of energy shot through her. The power was overwhelming, a strange combination of ancient magic and something darker, more malevolent. Clara gasped, pulling her hand back, but the damage was done. The energy was alive now, and it was responding to her presence. The stone beneath her feet cracked, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber. The entity had awakened, and it was angry. "Clara!" Alaric shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "You must stay focused. Do not let it take hold of you." Clara's heart raced as the ground beneath her began to tremble, the symbols glowing brighter, almost blinding her. She could feel the entity's power reaching for her, trying to pull her into its grasp. The air grew heavier, suffocating, and Clara stumbled back, but the force of the entity's magic pushed her forward. She fell to her knees, struggling to breathe as the darkness around her grew thicker. It was as if the very walls of the castle were closing in, trapping her in this unholy force. "I won't let you control me," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the growing roar of the entity's power. She reached out once more, this time with both hands, and placed them firmly on the altar. As her fingers touched the cold stone, a wave of energy shot through her, burning like fire, but she fought through it. She could feel the darkness trying to twist her thoughts, pull her under, but Clara clung to her purpose. She focused on the prince, on the hope that had awakened in his eyes, and she pushed through the pain. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her voice stronger now, her hands steady on the altar. The power surged again, but this time, it didn't overwhelm her. Clara's mind focused, her will unwavering. She reached deeper, feeling the source of the curse beneath the stone, a dark presence that had been feeding off the prince's soul for decades. It was the heart of the curse, the entity that had been bound to Kale for so long. Clara could feel its hatred, its desperation to consume, but she refused to let it. She had a choice now, a choice to break this curse and free the prince. She focused all of her energy on that thought, on the prince's freedom. She could hear his voice in her mind, faint but clear, urging her forward. "You're not alone," Kale whispered in her ear, though she knew he was still asleep in the infirmary. "You can do this." The connection between them was undeniable now. Clara's grip tightened on the stone as she gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She focused on the light, on the warmth that had returned to the prince's body when she had first touched him. The darkness raged around her, but she refused to let it win. Slowly, the darkness began to retreat, the symbols on the floor dimming and the air lightening. Clara gasped for breath as the pressure around her chest eased. The entity fought, thrashing against the magic that bound it, but Clara held firm. With one final push, she slammed her hands down on the stone altar, and a bright light filled the chamber. The growl of the entity echoed one last time before it vanished, its presence fading away, leaving the room still and silent. Clara collapsed to the ground, her body trembling from the effort, but she had done it. The curse was broken. The prince was free. King Alaric rushed to her side, his face filled with awe and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You saved him." Clara looked up at him, exhausted but relieved. She had done what she thought was impossible. She had broken the curse, freed the prince, and banished the dark force that had plagued the kingdom for so long. But as she sat there, breathing heavily, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. What would happen now that the prince was awake? Would their lives return to normal, or had everything changed forever? She looked at the king, who was still watching her with an intensity that made her feel as though she were the center of something much larger than herself. "What happens now?" she asked softly. The king met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. And you, Clara Thompson, will be a part of that. You've proven that you are more than just a simple girl. You are someone powerful, someone who has changed the course of our future." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life, and the prince's, would never be the same again. Clara took a deep breath as she stood before the stone altar, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The air in the chamber was thick with magic, a palpable force that made her skin tingle. King Alaric stood a few steps behind her, his gaze intense, never leaving her. The entity was close, its presence almost suffocating, but Clara steeled herself. She had come this far. She couldn't turn back now. She moved slowly, cautiously, toward the center of the altar, her heart pounding with each step. As she did, the symbols on the ground seemed to pulse, glowing faintly, as though they were alive, reacting to her every move. It was as if the very stone beneath her feet was alive, warning her to leave. But she wasn't about to give up. She had a task to complete, and it was one that could change the fate of the prince, and perhaps the entire kingdom. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, and Clara felt a cold, creeping sensation up her spine. She could sense the entity now, its power radiating through the air like a dark cloud surrounding her. It was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She could feel its eyes on her, but she refused to let it control her fear. With a trembling hand, she reached for the symbols etched into the stone. Her fingers brushed against them, and immediately, a surge of energy shot through her. The power was overwhelming, a strange combination of ancient magic and something darker, more malevolent. Clara gasped, pulling her hand back, but the damage was done. The energy was alive now, and it was responding to her presence. The stone beneath her feet cracked, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber. The entity had awakened, and it was angry. "Clara!" Alaric shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "You must stay focused. Do not let it take hold of you." Clara's heart raced as the ground beneath her began to tremble, the symbols glowing brighter, almost blinding her. She could feel the entity's power reaching for her, trying to pull her into its grasp. The air grew heavier, suffocating, and Clara stumbled back, but the force of the entity's magic pushed her forward. She fell to her knees, struggling to breathe as the darkness around her grew thicker. It was as if the very walls of the castle were closing in, trapping her in this unholy force. "I won't let you control me," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the growing roar of the entity's power. She reached out once more, this time with both hands, and placed them firmly on the altar. As her fingers touched the cold stone, a wave of energy shot through her, burning like fire, but she fought through it. She could feel the darkness trying to twist her thoughts, pull her under, but Clara clung to her purpose. She focused on the prince, on the hope that had awakened in his eyes, and she pushed through the pain. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, her voice stronger now, her hands steady on the altar. The power surged again, but this time, it didn't overwhelm her. Clara's mind focused, her will unwavering. She reached deeper, feeling the source of the curse beneath the stone, a dark presence that had been feeding off the prince's soul for decades. It was the heart of the curse, the entity that had been bound to Kale for so long. Clara could feel its hatred, its desperation to consume, but she refused to let it. She had a choice now, a choice to break this curse and free the prince. She focused all of her energy on that thought, on the prince's freedom. She could hear his voice in her mind, faint but clear, urging her forward. "You're not alone," Kale whispered in her ear, though she knew. He was still asleep in the infirmary. "You can do this." The connection between them was undeniable now. Clara's grip tightened on the stone as she gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She focused on the light, on the warmth that had returned to the prince's body when she had first touched him. The darkness raged around her, but she refused to let it win. Slowly, the darkness began to retreat, the symbols on the floor dimming and the air lightening. Clara gasped for breath as the pressure around her chest eased. The entity fought, thrashing against the magic that bound it, but Clara held firm. With one final push, she slammed her hands down on the stone altar, and a bright light filled the chamber. The growl of the entity echoed one last time before it vanished, its presence fading away, leaving the room still and silent. Clara collapsed to the ground, her body trembling from the effort, but she had done it. The curse was broken. The prince was free. King Alaric rushed to her side, his face filled with awe and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You saved him." Clara looked up at him, exhausted but relieved. She had done what she thought was impossible. She had broken the curse, freed the prince, and banished the dark force that had plagued the kingdom for so long. But as she sat there, breathing heavily, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. What would happen now that the prince was awake? Would their lives return to normal, or had everything changed forever? She looked at the king, who was still watching her with an intensity that made her feel as though she were the center of something much larger than herself. "What happens now?" she asked softly. The king met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. And you, Clara Thompson, will be a part of that. You've proven that you are more than just a simple girl. You are someone powerful, someone who has changed the course of our future." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life, and the prince's, would never be the same again. Clara could hardly believe what had just happened. The curse had been broken, and the prince, Kale, was now awake, breathing steadily, and free from the hold that had kept him locked in a death-like slumber for 50 long years. She had done it. She had freed him. But even as she sat there, trying to catch her breath, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger than herself. The king had ordered that she stay in the castle for the time being, but Clara had a feeling that the days ahead would not be peaceful. King Alaric had made it clear that she had a unique role to play in the future of the kingdom. The powerful energy that had been within her had awakened something that now had the king's full attention. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, a simple girl from a small village with no special talents or powers. But now, in the aftermath of breaking the curse, she felt different, as though her very existence had shifted. She had proven herself in a way she hadn't known possible. "Clara," the king had said to her the night before as they sat together in the royal chambers, "what you did cannot go unnoticed. You saved my son, but you've also shown me something more. You're not just a delivery girl. You are something else, something more powerful than even I can understand." His words had lingered in her mind as she lay in her bed, the weight of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. But she had no time to dwell on the mystery of her newfound power. The kingdom was still at war, the enemies that had been lurking in the shadows were still out there, and they would not simply allow the prince to return to his rightful place without a fight. And it was clear that the king's enemies would stop at nothing to gain control of the prince and of the kingdom. Clara knew that she had to stand by the king's side. It was no longer just about waking up the prince. It was about protecting him and the kingdom from the dangers that were closing in. The next few days passed in a blur. Clara spent time with the prince, watching him recover, his strength returning slowly but surely. Kale, who had been so pale and lifeless when she first touched him, was now starting to regain his color, his eyes no longer clouded with the remnants of the curse. He was still weak, but he had begun to speak again, his voice rough from disuse, but growing stronger each day. As for King Alaric, he was no longer the cold, distant ruler Clara had met when she first arrived at the castle. There was a softness in him now, a warmth that had been absent before. He had become more human, more approachable, but still, the weight of his responsibilities was ever present. He had to protect the kingdom. He had to protect his son, and he had to do so quickly, before the forces that sought to overthrow him could gather enough strength. Clara. The king called to her one evening as they sat in his study, the shadows of the castle stretching long into the night. There is something I need you to understand. The curse you broke, while it has freed my son, has also put us in a dangerous position. Those who would see me fall, who would see the kingdom crumble, know that Kale's return is a sign of my power growing once again, and they will stop at nothing to destroy us. Clara listened intently, her gaze steady. She had seen the darkness in the king's eyes when he spoke of these threats, and she could feel the weight of it pressing in on her. It wasn't just about the prince's curse anymore. It was about survival. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice calm, though her heart raced. The king turned to face her, his expression serious. "I need you to help me uncover who is behind these attacks. I have my suspicions, but there are too many factions at play. Too many enemies hiding in the shadows. You've seen the power within you, Clara. I believe that power can help us uncover the truth." Clara felt a chill run through her. What the king was asking of her wasn't just about breaking curses. It was about something much darker, finding the forces that sought to destroy the kingdom before they struck. "How do I begin?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease swirling inside her. The king's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Clara saw a flicker of something else in his gaze: trust. "There is a group, a secret council, that has been plotting against me for years," he said. "They have spies within the castle, within my own court. You must find them, Clara. You must uncover who they are, and what their true intentions are." Clara nodded, the weight of the task settling over her. She didn't know what she was walking into, but she couldn't turn back now. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll find out who's behind this." The king stood up, walking to the window and gazing out over the kingdom. "Be careful," he warned, his voice low. "You are more than just a girl from a village now, Clara. You are part of this kingdom's fate, and that fate will not be kind to those who stand in its way." As Clara stood in the dimly lit room, watching the king's back as he looked out over the kingdom, she realized that everything had changed. She wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was a part of this world now, an essential piece of a much larger puzzle. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and the road ahead would be treacherous. But Clara had no choice but to walk it. For the prince, for the king, and for the future of the kingdom. Clara stood at the edge of the castle's courtyard, watching the horizon where the sun dipped below the distant mountains. Her heart was heavy with the responsibility placed on her shoulders. King Alaric had tasked her with a dangerous mission, uncovering the conspirators hiding within his own court. The very idea made Clara uneasy. She had never been a part of this world, never thought she would be caught up in the politics and deceit of royal life. But now, the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. The prince's awakening had set things into motion. Kale, once a fragile, cursed boy, was now recovering, and the kingdom's enemies were already circling like vultures. Clara could feel the pressure mounting. She had no choice but to succeed. There was too much at risk. The king's words echoed in her mind. "You are part of this kingdom's fate." The weight of that statement had taken root deep within her. Clara wasn't just here to help the prince. She was here to protect everything: his family, the kingdom, and the very future they all shared. As she made her way back inside, her thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling her name. It was Oren, the royal physician who had been tending to Kale's recovery. His face was grim, and there was an urgency in his step as he approached her. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "the king wants to see you." "Now." Clara nodded, her heart skipping a beat. The king had been keeping a close watch on her ever since the curse was broken. She followed Oren through the castle's grand hallways, the stone walls closing in on her as she thought about the king's growing expectations. What did he want now? As they reached the study, the doors opened, and she was ushered inside. King Alaric was standing by the window, his back to her. The room was bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the floor. He turned as she entered, his eyes sharp, but there was a weariness to his expression. "Clara," he said, his voice commanding yet tired. "I need your help again." Clara felt her stomach tighten. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't sure she was ready. "What is it, Your Majesty?" she asked, her voice steady. The king looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words. "There are too many people in my court with something to hide," he said quietly, "and I fear they are preparing to make their move. I need someone I can trust to watch them, to uncover their plans before it's too late. I need you to keep your eyes open, Clara. Watch those closest to me. Find the traitors." Clara's mind raced. She had no training for this, no experience in espionage or royal politics. But she had proven herself once before. The king believed in her, and that trust was something she could not take lightly. "I understand," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'll do whatever it takes." The king nodded, then stepped closer to her. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll give you the resources you need. Orin will help you, as will the guards. But you must be careful. There are people in this castle who would see us fall. You must watch your back." Clara nodded, though her heart was pounding. She had never felt more out of her depth. But she couldn't turn back. Too much depended on her now. As she left the king's study, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the task ahead. There was no time to waste. The kingdom was at war, and its enemies were already planning their next move. She had to find them before they struck. Over the next few days, Clara began her quiet investigation. She started by observing the servants, the courtiers, and even the nobles who had once greeted her with warmth and respect. Now, she watched them with suspicion, noting their every movement, their whispered conversations, their fleeting glances. Each day, she felt herself drawn deeper into a web of secrets. It wasn't just the royal court she had to worry about. There were rumors of a shadow organization, a group of powerful individuals who sought to control the kingdom from the shadows. Clara had no proof, no leads, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something sinister was brewing just beneath the surface. As the days wore on, Clara grew more and more wary. She could feel the eyes of the castle on her, and it seemed as if everyone she met had something to hide. One evening, as she made her way through the castle's halls after dark, she heard hushed voices in a corner. She crept closer, her heart racing, and peeked around the corner. There, standing in the shadows, were two men, noblemen she had seen around the court. They were talking in low tones, their words indistinct, but Clara could make out one phrase: "The time is near." The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She knew that the time had come to act, but she wasn't sure if she was ready. She had to be. The fate of the kingdom rested in her hands now, and there was no turning back. The next day, she returned to the king, her mind made up. She had learned more than she had expected, but the danger was far from over. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing before him, "I have found something. There are people within your court who are planning something. I don't know the full extent yet, but I've heard whispers that say the time is near." King Alaric's face hardened. "I knew it," he muttered, "but I need more. Clara, we don't have much time. We must stop them before they act." Clara felt the weight of the king's words settle over her. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But in that moment, she realized that her role in this kingdom was more important than she had ever imagined. She had become the key to its survival, and there was no turning back. The real battle had only just begun. Clara had spent the following days in a whirlwind of uncertainty, with the weight of her newfound responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. King Alaric had given her a task she never thought she would be a part of: to uncover the traitors in the court and protect the prince, the kingdom, and everything that they had fought for. But with each passing day, she felt more and more like a pawn in a game of politics she didn't fully understand. She had begun to notice things, small details that seemed out of place. Noblemen who lingered too long in the shadows. Whispers that stopped when she entered the room. Eyes that followed her when she wasn't looking. It was clear that something was amiss. The conspirators were closing in, and they had made it clear that they would not hesitate to strike. But Clara had to remain vigilant. She had no choice. As the days went by, the tension in the castle grew thicker. She had a target now, a name whispered in secret corridors, a nobleman who had always seemed too eager to gain the king's favor. Lord Valen, a man with too much ambition and too many connections. Clara had begun to suspect him from the moment she had overheard the conversation between the two courtiers. "The time is near." That had been the phrase that stuck with her. It was a subtle message, but Clara knew that Lord Valen was involved in whatever plot was unfolding behind the king's back. She couldn't let him slip through her fingers. One evening, as the sun began to set over the kingdom, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. She had gathered enough information to confront Lord Valen, and she couldn't waste any more time. The castle was bustling with activity, but Clara knew that she had to act quickly. She slipped into the shadows, careful not to be seen, and made her way through the narrow passageways that led to Lord Valen's chambers. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Every step she took seemed to echo in her mind. She reached the door to his room, her heart pounding in her chest. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what she was about to do. But then, with a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The room was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a single candle on a table. Lord Valen was sitting by the window, his back to her. Clara's presence went unnoticed for a moment, but when she stepped forward, he turned, his eyes narrowing in surprise. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth but laced with a hint of suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Clara stood her ground, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I know what you've been plotting, Lord Valen," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the room. "I know you've been working against the king." His eyes flickered with something, fear, perhaps, or anger. But he quickly masked it, replacing it with a cold smile. "You're mistaken," he said, standing up slowly. "The king is my ally. I would never do anything to harm him." Clara's gaze hardened. "Don't lie to me. I've heard your whispers, and I know what you're planning. You think you can take the throne for yourself. But I won't let you. I won't let anyone destroy this kingdom." Lord Valen's smile faltered for a moment, but then he straightened, his posture rigid with defiance. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice rising slightly. "The king is weak. The kingdom is crumbling. It's only a matter of time before someone takes control." Clara stepped closer, her anger building. "You'll never have control. Not as long as I'm here. I will stop you." For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of Clara's words hanging in the air. But then, without warning, Lord Valen lunged forward, grabbing her by the wrist and spinning her around to face him. His grip was tight, but Clara didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze, her eyes burning with determination. "You think you can scare me?" she said, her voice steady. "You can't. I've faced worse than you." He growled low in his throat, but before he could react, Clara broke free of his hold, pushing him away with all the strength she had. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock, but Clara didn't stop. She stepped forward, every inch of her body screaming for justice, for the truth to be exposed. "You'll pay for your treachery," she said, her voice low and fierce. Lord Valen's expression shifted, his facade cracking for a moment. He knew she was serious. But then, in the blink of an eye, he pulled a dagger from his belt and lunged at her. Clara didn't hesitate. She stepped to the side, narrowly avoiding the blade as it sliced through the air. The room was filled with the sound of their struggle, the clash of metal against stone as Clara fought back. She was fast, precise, and determined. She wasn't about to let this man destroy everything she had fought for. With one swift movement, she disarmed him, sending the dagger clattering to the floor. Lord Valen fell to his knees, panting, his eyes filled with rage and disbelief. Clara stood over him, her chest heaving with exertion, but her resolve was unwavering. "You're finished," she said, her voice cold. "The king will know the truth about you, and your plans will never come to fruition." As she turned to leave, she glanced back at Lord Valen one last time. The look in his eyes was one of desperation, but Clara didn't feel sorry for him. He had made his choice, and now she had made hers. She would protect this kingdom. She would protect the prince, and nothing, not even the dark forces that lurked in the shadows, would stand in her way. Clara walked out of Lord Valen's chambers, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She had never imagined that her quiet investigation would lead to a moment like this. The weight of the dagger in her hand, the fury in Lord Valen's eyes, and the realization that she had come face to face with a traitor, all of it left her shaken, but resolute. She had made the right choice. She knew that now. As she made her way down the corridor, the weight of the secret she had uncovered settled on her shoulders. She had learned enough about the conspiracy to understand the true danger. Valen wasn't just a petty noble trying to take power. He was a part of something much darker, something that reached deep into the very heart of the kingdom. The forces against King Alaric were not just political. They were about power, ancient, and unyielding. Clara had no idea how deep the conspiracy went, but she could feel the danger closing in around her. The shadow of the plot that had nearly consumed the prince was still hanging over them. And if Valen had been one of the key players, who else was involved? The thought gnawed at her as she continued to walk through the castle's winding corridors. It seemed as if the walls themselves were closing in, the air growing heavier with every step. But there was no turning back now. The king had entrusted her with the future of the kingdom. She had to see this through. When Clara arrived at the royal study, she found King Alaric seated at the massive oak desk, his eyes focused on a series of ancient scrolls. The weight of the task before him was clear in his posture. He looked up as she entered, his face a mask of both exhaustion and determination. "Clara," he said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "What's happened? You've been gone for longer than I expected." Clara took a deep breath before speaking. "I found the traitor. Lord Valen is behind it. He's been plotting against you, against the kingdom." The king's eyes narrowed, but there was no surprise in them, only quiet resignation. "I suspected as much," he murmured, his hand rubbing his temples. "He's ambitious. He's always been. But this is more than I anticipated. What else did you find?" Clara stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. "He's not acting alone. There's a larger conspiracy, a shadow group within the court, pulling strings, trying to take control." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I'm not sure who else is involved, but it's clear that the threat is growing." The king stood, his expression hardening. "I've known for some time that enemies have been lurking within my own walls, but I didn't think they'd move so openly. Valen's actions are only the beginning." Clara nodded, her gut telling her that the king was right. "They'll stop at nothing to take you down," she said, her voice low. "And if we don't act fast, the kingdom could fall apart." The king's gaze sharpened. "You're right. I need to move quickly, but we can't show our hand too soon. If we make the wrong move, we could give them the advantage." Clara's mind raced. She knew that the king couldn't afford to make a misstep. The conspiracy was vast and dangerous, and every decision would have consequences. "What do we do next?" she asked. King Alaric's eyes flickered to the window, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. "We gather our allies," he said, his voice cold and calculated. "We need to know who we can trust, and we need to take down Valen and his associates before they can strike again. But we must be careful. The court will be watching, and we cannot afford to expose ourselves prematurely." Clara nodded again, understanding the gravity of the situation. She knew the king had to be strategic. The threat was real, and their enemies were powerful. "I'll help," she said. "I'll find out who else is involved. I'll do whatever it takes." The king looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. "You've already done more than I ever expected," he said. "But this is not a task for one person. You'll need help." Clara's chest tightened. She knew the stakes were higher now than ever before. She was in this for the long haul. As she left the study, her mind was spinning with plans, with strategies, with questions. She had uncovered the first piece of the puzzle, but the rest was still out of reach. She had to find the others who were involved, those who were pulling the strings behind the scenes, and expose them before it was too late. The kingdom's future rested in her hands, and Clara was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As she walked down the darkened halls, a new sense of purpose filled her. The conspiracy was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever came next. There was no turning back now. Clara stood at the edge of the castle's balcony, staring out over the vast kingdom that stretched beneath her. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. King Alaric's forces had struck first, catching Lord Valen and his conspirators off guard. The nobles who had been plotting against the throne had been exposed, their treachery laid bare for all to see. But it had not been without sacrifice. The kingdom was still reeling from the shock of the betrayal. Allies had been lost, and the wounds of war would take time to heal. Clara had been at the center of it all. Her actions, her decisions had shaped the course of this conflict. And while the prince had been freed and the kingdom was safe for now, she knew that the shadows of the past would always linger. She had uncovered the conspiracy, but she hadn't fully understood the consequences of what she had done. She had given everything to stop Lord Valen and his followers, but now, as the kingdom began to rebuild, she wondered what role she would play in this new world. The prince, Kale, had recovered fully from his curse, but he was no longer the boy who had been locked away for so many years. He was a leader now, a man who would one day take his place at the head of the kingdom. And Clara? She was no longer just the girl who had delivered bread to the castle. She had become something more, something stronger. But the question still lingered. Where did she belong now? King Alaric had been grateful for her help, but there were times when his gratitude felt like a heavy burden. She had proven herself, yes, but now she had to prove herself again, not just to the king, but to herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew she couldn't stay hidden in the shadows of the past. As the king's most trusted ally, she would have to help lead the kingdom forward. Her place was at his side, and perhaps one day, at Kale's as well. But that was a decision for another time. For now, there was peace. The war had ended. The conspirators had been dealt with. And though the scars of the past would never fully disappear, there was hope for the future. The sound of footsteps behind her broke Clara from her thoughts. She turned to see the king walking toward her, his expression thoughtful but relieved. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of responsibility. "You've done more for this kingdom than I could ever ask for. I can't thank you enough." Clara nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "I did what needed to be done," she said simply. The king studied her for a moment before speaking again. "But I know it hasn't been easy for you. You've given up a lot, more than anyone could ask of you." Clara looked out over the kingdom, her mind full of the choices she had made, the path she had taken. "I've made my choices," she said quietly, "and I'll live with them." The king sighed, stepping closer to her. "We all must, Clara. But know this, you are part of this kingdom now, part of this family, and you will never be alone in this fight." Clara's heart swelled at his words, though she didn't show it. She had never been part of a family like this before. She had never known what it was to have people to rely on, to stand beside her in the hardest moments of her life. But now she did. "Thank you," she said softly. The king smiled, his eyes full of pride. "No, Clara. Thank you. For everything." As he turned to leave, Clara stood there, alone once more. But this time, she didn't feel quite so lost. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. She had been tested, and she had survived. And she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. As she looked out over the kingdom once more, Clara realized that this was just the beginning. The kingdom had been saved, the prince freed, and the dark forces defeated. But the work was far from over. There would always be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more choices to make. And Clara would be ready for them. She was no longer the girl who had stumbled into this world by accident. She was part of its story now, and she would write the next chapter herself.